Picture this. You wake up on New Year's Day, and instead of champagne and celebration, you hear air raid sirens. Again, for the fourth day in a row. Welcome to Moscow in January 2026, where every single day since the new year began has brought Ukrainian drones overhead, and the city that Vladimir Putin once promised would never feel the war is now living it in real time. And here's what they're not telling you on mainstream media. This isn't just about military targets anymore. This is about something far more profound happening right under our noses, something that could fundamentally change how this entire conflict unfolds. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you is going to completely reframe everything you thought you knew about where this war is heading. Let's start with the numbers, because they're absolutely staggering. According to Russia's own defense ministry, Ukraine has targeted Moscow with drones every single day of 2026. Every single day. We're talking about a systematic campaign that marks a dramatic shift from the sporadic, symbolic strikes we saw in the past. On January 4th alone, Russian air defense systems claimed to have shot down 57 drones over the Moscow region. 57 in one day, out of a total of 437 drones intercepted across all of Russia that same night. Reuters confirmed these figures after analyzing official statements from Moscow, and the pattern is undeniable. This isn't random anymore. This is calculated, relentless pressure being applied directly to Russia's political and economic heart. But here's the catch. While Russian officials parade these interception numbers like victory trophies, they're conveniently ignoring the elephant in the room. Moscow's civilian aviation has been effectively paralyzed. And I'm not exaggerating. Russia's Federal Air Transport Agency, known as Rosaviatsia, has been reporting temporary restrictions at Moscow's three major airports almost daily. We're talking about Vnukovo, Domodedovo, and Zhukovsky. These aren't small regional airports. These are the arteries that keep Russia's capital connected to the world. On January 4th, approximately 200 flights were delayed in Moscow alone. 200 flights. Several others were canceled outright. The day before wasn't any better. Around 50 flights were delayed at Vnukovo, with multiple aircraft diverted to other airports entirely. Flight tracking services like Flight Radar showed something even more remarkable: an almost completely empty sky over Moscow during these attacks. Think about what that means. For a city of over 12 million people, for a capital that prides itself on being a global metropolis, the skies were empty. Now contrast this with the timing. This surge in attacks has come during one of Russia's most sacred travel periods, the extended New Year and Christmas holidays that run through January 9th. This is when millions of Russians traditionally travel domestically and abroad. It's the equivalent of hitting America during Thanksgiving week or Europe during Christmas. The economic impact alone is staggering, but the psychological warfare element is even more profound. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin has been posting regular updates on social media, carefully worded reports about successful interceptions of drones. But notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't specify where the debris is falling. He doesn't detail what damage is occurring. Russian authorities have developed this interesting pattern. They announce how many drones they've shot down, but they rarely provide details about actual consequences unless, and this is crucial, unless civilians are killed. That selective transparency tells you everything you need to know about what's really happening on the ground. Now let me take you inside what daily life actually looks like for ordinary Muscovites right now. According to reports from the Ukrainian Review, which has been tracking these developments closely, the drone attacks are reshaping fundamental perceptions of security in the Russian capital. Imagine trying to plan your day around air raid alerts. Imagine your children asking why the sirens keep going off. Imagine trying to catch a flight for a family vacation and finding out your airport is closed indefinitely due to drone threats. This is the new reality for people who, just 3 years ago, were told this war would be over in days and would never reach them. The most tangible consequence has been what analysts are calling the paralysis of civilian aviation. During the New Year's holiday period, when Russians normally flood airports heading to warmer climates or visiting family across the country's vast territory, the skies have been repeatedly shut down. Mass flight delays, canceled bookings, empty terminals, and constant uncertainty. Travel agencies across Moscow have reported unprecedented levels of cancellations and refund requests. Hotels in traditional holiday destinations are experiencing cascading booking failures. The ripple effects are spreading through Russia's entire tourism and hospitality sector. But this changes everything when you understand the broader strategy at play. Ukrainian officials haven't been shy about explaining their rationale for these deep strikes into Russian territory. This isn't about terror. This isn't about random destruction. According to statements from Ukraine's general staff, these attacks are part of a systematic strategy with three specific objectives. First, to disrupt military logistics deep inside Russia. Second, to damage energy infrastructure that supports Russia's war machine. And third, to dramatically increase the economic costs of this war for the Kremlin. Every closed airport costs millions. Every disrupted supply chain compounds. Every day that Moscow residents wake up to sirens is another day that the war's true cost becomes impossible to ignore. Let me give you some context that the mainstream media isn't connecting. Russian state news agency RIA Novosti calculated that Russian air defenses intercepted more than 1,500 Ukrainian drones over Russian territory and occupied Crimea in just 1 week. 1 week. Over the past 2 years, Ukrainian drones have most frequently targeted Russian oil refineries and energy infrastructure. But what's changed is the focus. The sustained pressure on Moscow itself represents a fundamental strategic shift. It's no longer just about degrading military capacity in remote regions. It's about making the war impossible to ignore for Russia's political and economic elite. And here's where it gets really interesting. On January 6th, Ukraine launched what multiple sources are calling the largest drone strike to date. Reports indicate that 337 drones struck targets across the entire European part of Russia. Moscow, Kursk, Belgorod, Oryol, Lipetsk, Bryansk, and Ryazan all reported drone activity and explosions. 337 drones in a single coordinated operation. To put that in perspective, that's more drones in one night than some countries have in their entire military inventory. This wasn't a raid. This was a statement. Targets included an ammunition depot in Bryansk that burned through the night, oil facilities in multiple regions, industrial sites in Penza and Lipetsk, a logistics depot belonging to Russia's 20th Motorized Rifle Division, and throughout Moscow and surrounding regions, the continuous pressure that has become the new normal. Satellite imagery verified significant damage at several locations. Social media from Russian citizens showed massive explosions lighting up night skies, videos of secondary detonations at ammunition storage facilities, fires at oil depots that burned for hours. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. For nearly 3 years, Russian state media has carefully curated a narrative that the war is happening somewhere else, that it's a distant special military operation that doesn't affect ordinary Russians, that Moscow is safe, secure, untouchable. That narrative is crumbling in real time. When your airport shuts down for the 4th consecutive day, when air raid sirens wake your children, when your vacation gets canceled because drones are overhead, the war is no longer distant. It's in your living room. It's disrupting your daily life. It's forcing you to confront questions that Russian state television can't answer. And speaking of questions, let's address the massive silence at the center of all this. Where is Vladimir Putin? Since these daily attacks began, Putin has been remarkably quiet about the drone campaign against Moscow. Yes, there was the dubious claim about an alleged attack on one of his residences in Novgorod, which both Ukraine and U.S. intelligence have disputed as likely fabrication. Yes, he's made general statements about continuing the war, but specific responses to the daily paralysis of Moscow's airports, specific explanations to residents about when this will end, specific strategies for countering this new reality, silence. That silence is deafening because it reveals something crucial. Putin built his entire political brand on being the strongman who restored Russian pride and security, the leader who made Russia feared and respected again, the man who promised to quickly defeat Ukraine and return life to normal. But how do you maintain that image when Ukrainian drones shut down your capital's airports every single day? How do you project strength when you can't even guarantee your citizens can catch a flight during the holidays? The answer is you go quiet and hope the problem resolves itself before the political damage becomes terminal. Russian military analysts, quoted by the Moscow Times, have noted that more than 30 Russian airports faced regular airspace closures throughout the summer of 2025 due to Ukrainian drone threats. But the sustained daily pressure on Moscow specifically is unprecedented. It's forcing resource allocation decisions that create vulnerabilities elsewhere. Every air defense system protecting Moscow is one that can't be deployed to the front lines. Every fighter aircraft on patrol over the capital is one that can't provide close air support to ground forces in Ukraine. The strategic dilemma is elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Ukraine's drone production has apparently ramped up significantly. Multiple sources indicate that Ukraine is now launching more long-range drones than Russia, reversing what was once Russia's advantage in unmanned aerial warfare. Some estimates suggest Ukraine deployed over 34,000 strike drones and decoy UAVs in 2025 alone. The production capacity, the targeting intelligence, and the operational sophistication have all improved dramatically. These aren't crude, improvised weapons anymore. These are increasingly capable systems that can penetrate hundreds of kilometers into Russian territory, evade detection, and strike with precision. The economic calculus is also shifting in Ukraine's favor. While the exact costs are classified, defense analysts estimate that each Ukrainian long-range drone costs somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000 to produce, depending on the model and sophistication. Compare that to the Russian air defense missiles being expended to shoot them down. A single S-400 surface-to-air missile costs upwards of $1 million. Even cheaper Pantsir system missiles run around $50,000 each. When Russia fires multiple interceptors at drone swarms, the economics become unsustainable. You're spending millions to counter thousands. That math doesn't work long-term, especially for an economy already strained by sanctions and war expenditures. The human dimension of this campaign is equally important. Russian social media has exploded with posts from frustrated Muscovites sharing their experiences, stranded travelers, parents worried about their children's safety, business owners losing money due to closures and disruptions, veterans questioning why the war they were told would be quick and victorious is now following them home. This isn't just military pressure, this is societal pressure building from within. Every day that life in Moscow becomes more difficult, more uncertain, more disrupted, is another day that the Russian population's tolerance for this war erodes a little further. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been explicit about the goal. In multiple statements throughout December and early January, he emphasized that bringing the cost of war home to Russia is essential to achieving peace. Not through terror against civilians, but through making the continuation of aggression economically and politically untenable for Moscow's leadership, by targeting military logistics, energy infrastructure, and demonstrating that Russia's heartland is not immune to consequences. Ukraine is attempting to create the conditions where negotiations become preferable to continued conflict. But here's what mainstream media is missing in their coverage. This isn't just about Ukraine fighting back. This represents a broader shift in how modern warfare is evolving. Relatively inexpensive drone technology is fundamentally changing strategic calculations. A nation like Ukraine, significantly outgunned in conventional terms, can now project power deep into a nuclear-armed adversary's territory using asymmetric means. The barriers to entry for long-range strike capabilities have collapsed. What once required expensive bomber fleets or cruise missiles can now be accomplished with drones that cost a fraction as much and can be produced at scale. The implications extend far beyond Ukraine and Russia. Every military planner in every capital around the world is watching this closely and recalculating their assumptions. Air defense systems that cost billions of dollars are being overwhelmed by drone swarms that cost millions. Critical infrastructure that was once thought secure behind geographic distance is now vulnerable. The strategic depth that large countries like Russia have traditionally relied upon for security is shrinking rapidly. Distance no longer provides the protection it once did. For Moscow's residents, these abstract strategic considerations matter far less than the immediate daily disruptions. But those disruptions are precisely the point. War is no longer something happening to someone else, somewhere else. It's the canceled flight. It's the closed airport. It's the siren interrupting dinner. It's the constant low-grade anxiety that has settled over a city that hasn't experienced anything like this since World War II. That psychological toll accumulates day after day, creating political pressure that even authoritarian systems cannot entirely ignore. Russia's response options are increasingly limited and unattractive. Escalating attacks on Ukrainian civilians has already been tried extensively and only stiffened Ukrainian resolve while further alienating international opinion. Mobilizing more troops faces massive domestic resistance, as demonstrated by the hundreds of thousands of military-age Russian men who fled the country during previous mobilization attempts. Nuclear threats have been made repeatedly and have lost their coercive power through overuse. Negotiating from a position of weakness is anathema to Putin's political brand, so the default becomes maintaining the current course and hoping something breaks in Ukraine first. But the daily drumbeat of drones over Moscow suggests Ukraine isn't breaking. If anything, the campaign is intensifying. January 6th's 337 drone strike wasn't a one-time spectacular. It was a demonstration of capability that can apparently be repeated and sustained. Ukrainian officials have hinted that domestic drone production will continue increasing throughout 2026. New models with greater range, better penetration capabilities, and improved targeting are in development. The strategic initiative in this particular domain has shifted, and Moscow is struggling to respond effectively. The silence from Putin is therefore both tactical and telling. Tactical because acknowledging the full scale of the problem would require explaining why his military cannot stop it, which undermines the entire narrative of Russian strength and inevitable victory. Telling because it reveals the genuine strategic dilemma facing Russian leadership. There are no good options available. Every potential response carries significant costs and risks. The status quo is unsustainable, but changing course requires admitting failure. So silence becomes the default, buying time while hoping circumstances change. For those of us watching from outside, the lesson is clear. Wars are not won solely on battlefields. They're won in the collective will of populations to continue fighting. They're won in economic sustainability. They're won in the ability to inflict costs that the adversary finds unacceptable. Ukraine's drone campaign against Moscow is explicitly designed to shift those calculations. Every closed airport, every delayed flight, every nervous resident is part of a broader strategy to make continuing this war more costly than ending it. The ultimate question is whether this pressure will prove sufficient to change Russian policy. History suggests that authoritarian regimes can endure significant domestic pressure, especially when they control information flows and suppress dissent. But history also shows that no regime is immune to sustained internal discontent, particularly when the promised quick victory turns into years of grinding sacrifice. Moscow's empty skies and closed airports are small data points in a much larger equation. But they're data points that compound daily, weekly, monthly, building towards some eventual tipping point that we can only speculate about. What we can say with certainty is this: the war that Vladimir Putin promised would never reach Moscow is now there every single day. Ukrainian drones overhead have become the new normal. Air raid sirens interrupt daily life. Airports close without warning. Travel plans collapse. And the psychological distance that once insulated Russian citizens from the consequences of their government's decisions has evaporated. The war is no longer somewhere else. It's here. It's now. It's unavoidable. And that fundamental shift in lived reality may prove more strategically significant than any number of tanks destroyed or territory captured on distant battlefields. So as we move deeper into 2026, watch Moscow. Watch whether these daily drone attacks continue. Watch whether the Kremlin develops effective countermeasures or simply absorbs the punishment. Watch whether Russian public sentiment begins to shift as the costs become impossible to ignore. Watch whether Putin's silence continues or whether he's eventually forced to address the question no Russian leader wants to answer. How do you claim to be winning a war when you cannot protect your own capital from daily attacks? That question hangs over Moscow like the drones themselves, unanswered and increasingly urgent. The next few months will tell us whether Ukraine's strategy of bringing the war home to Russia can achieve what frontal assaults on fortified positions cannot, whether sustained pressure on civilian infrastructure and daily life in Moscow can accomplish what diplomacy and battlefield victories have not, whether the economic and psychological costs can mount high enough to force a genuine recalculation in the Kremlin. The answers will shape not just this war, but how conflicts are fought in the drone age for decades to come. And it's all happening right now, every single day, in the skies over Moscow, while the world watches and Putin remains conspicuously silent. This is the story mainstream media isn't fully telling you. This is the strategic shift happening in real time. And this is why you need to stay informed. Stay critical and keep questioning the narratives being fed to us, because the truth is always more complex, more nuanced, and more important than the headlines suggest. If this analysis gave you a different perspective, hit that like button, subscribe for more in-depth coverage that goes beyond the surface, and share this with anyone who wants to truly understand what's happening in this conflict. The algorithms suppress this kind of detailed analysis, so your engagement literally determines whether this reaches people who need to see it. Stay informed, stay critical, and I'll see you in the next one.